This is Patrick Connor of QueensburyRules.com with another episode of Boxing with the Beard. I know it's kind of late preview episode, but it's before Friday, or some of you might be watching this on Friday morning, so I think that that's early enough, but there's quite a bit of boxing going on this week, so I guess I'll just kind of get started and try to move along as quickly as I can. Tomorrow night, Friday night on ESPN2 is going to be not a super strong card, it doesn't look like, and I'm not even going to bother talking about the undercard right now, but it's going to be Javier Fortuna versus Miguel Zamudio. Fortuna, a lot of people are familiar with because he was on just about every prospect of the year type of list for 2012. He has kind of edged into the category of a contender at this point. He is a good kind of seek and destroy type of southpaw. He has a stiff punch. It looks so far like he might be a little befuddled by movement, and he might have a little bit of an issue if a guy can box, but we haven't seen it at a high level yet. Although it was reported earlier today that he lost his basically interim WBA featherweight title at the scale by coming in heavy. And Zamudio I actually did have to look up. I wasn't familiar with him. I don't think he's fought outside of Mexico, and I'm not super familiar with any of his opponents, but I did find some video of him on YouTube, thank goodness, and he looked fairly hittable. He doesn't look to have a very good defense. He comes in a little bit wide, and he's kind of plodding. So I think that he's basically going to be right up Fortuna's alley, and I expect Fortuna to probably take him out. And that's about it for Friday night fights anyway. And the real action's pretty much all day Saturday, starting with, I believe the first show is going to be Box Nation, which is Nathan Cleverly versus Robin Krasniqi. I actually had to look Krasniqi up as well. He has a pretty decent record. He hasn't lost in something like 7 years. And he's, I want to say like 38-2 or something like that. And his 2 losses came pretty early in his career in either 4 or 6 rounders. He doesn't have a whole lot of punching power. He kind of has a weird style where he leads with uppercuts and, throws wide punches, but, kind of taps and then throws wide, hard punches. Not a lot of punching power, but I think that he's probably going to force Nathan Cleverly to fight a little bit more than Nathan Cleverly's last opponent could. I saw him against Sean Hawk on the undercard of Abner Mares against Moreno, and he didn't look bad by any means, but the guy that he was in with was clearly not very skilled, very slow, made him kind of look good, and regardless, Cleverly slapped with his shots a little bit, and I don't see a whole lot of punching power from him, even though he has good technique and pretty stiff shots. The guy that he's going to be facing, as far as I can see, is going to be kind of walking to him and making him fight. So what that means, I'm not sure, but it might be a decent fight, more than people, or better fight than people realize. I guess it remains to be seen, but that's the main event on that Box Nation card. Under that, Derek Chisora is coming back. As I said on our new radio show, Queensbury Rules Radio, that I'm hosting with James Foley, I've never been a big fan inside the ring. He's just kind of unpredictable outside the ring. He's, animated, needless to say, and has personality, but it's just not really for me. And in any event, he comes back against a guy that has lost every fight against even remotely world-class, ish competition. Not even really top 10 ranked type guys, but it's probably basically just going to get Derek Chisora back, back in the fold, or, back with another win. It's the first time he's back since the Hay debacle. And it's kind of, just going to get some rounds for him, I think. And also notable are 2 other fighters fighting on the undercard that, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but they're 2 guys that probably should be hanging up their gloves at this point, and that's Enzo Maccarinelli and Scott Harrison, guys that are kind of just on borrowed time. Scott Harrison has had a ton of legal trouble, and he was out since, I want to say, 2005 or 2006, and then came back in like 2010 or 11. And then Macaronelli, in the last 5 years, he's been knocked out 5 times. So, and they always seem to be pretty nasty knockouts. So you got to worry about a guy who's getting flattened once a year. That's not very good for his health, needless to say, and I'm not entirely sure that he should be continuing fighting. Another card this weekend is the TV Azteca Unimas card, and it's not a huge fight by any means, but significant enough to go over briefly. That's Victor Terrazas versus Cristian Mijares. Mijares, a lot of people know because he initially kind of came somewhat out of nowhere to beat Jorge Arce some years back, but then had a rough run where he wound up losing to Victor Chinian and then Anselmo Moreno a couple times, and he's kind of bounced back since then, but just not against great opposition. Of course, he wound up in his last fight beating Raul Marquez, which was kind of a bittersweet type of victory for a lot of people who enjoyed watching Marquez over his career. I don't know that there's any indication Marquez is retired, but regardless, he's definitely near the end, if not at the end. In any event, Mijares is kind of a boxer type of guy. He uses his feet quite a bit. I haven't seen a ton of him during his comeback, just the more major fights or whatever. And he looks okay, but he's also quite a bit heavier than he started out at, and that's probably going to take a toll here. Terrazas is kind of a guy that applies pressure, pretty steady pressure, but at the same time he can, from what I've seen, take rounds off and kind of be a little too defensive, wait a little too long, almost what we saw again, with Brian Viloria recently. And it's just kind of, I think that if he were a little more tenacious with how he fought, he would be a little more effective. But I would look for him to win on that card in any event. And also on the undercard of that card, Juanma Lopez is fighting. He's on his second fight since being suspended for talking trash about the Puerto Rican referee in the Orlando Salido rematch after the fight. And he's on his second fight back, and he's fighting a Mexican in Mexico City. So I don't know that that's going to mean anything at all, but it could get kind of interesting with the kind of perceived rivalry, at least the boxing rivalry there. That could be kind of interesting, but it'll also be interesting to see how he looks on his comeback, because I think a lot of people have written him off, even though he's fairly young. He's had a couple nasty losses, and his stock went pretty far down, needless to say, but he's still an attractive fighter. He, is a guy that throws hard, can punch, and he's fun to watch for the most part. So I hope he's able to come back. Also on Saturday is the NBC Sports card, the afternoon boxing, which is nice to see. Of course, pre-evening boxing is always nice. I'm probably going to have to catch up to that after work. But Tyson Fury is fighting Steve Cunningham. And it's kind of an interesting fight, I suppose, but I'm worried a little bit that the size discrepancy is going to be a little bit too much for Cunningham. I kind of feel bad for Steve Cunningham because he seems like a likable guy. He has a fairly likable style with the way that he fights, but he's had some kind of hard luck losses in his career. I think he's had about 6 losses or so, and all of them that I've seen have either been very controversial or close. So, I have no reason to believe that he won't fight his ass off in this fight, but I don't know that he'll be big enough. And on the other hand, Tyson Fury, I was not quite a believer, just like many people, when we saw video clips of him hitting himself in the face earlier in his career, and I just saw things like that and saw how wild he was and how big he was, and I just kind of had to laugh. And now I don't think that he's a laughing matter. I think that he's definitely improved as a fighter. He's using his size and his length a little bit better. and measuring himself a little bit better. I don't know what his ceiling is going to be, but he sure talks a great game, and he's talked his way into having a decent amount of people believe that he could be the next bigger star in the heavyweight division, for whatever that means, for whatever that's worth. But in any event, I think that I'm probably expecting Tyson Fury to win by stoppage just because of the size disparity. But I do think that Cunningham won't go down without a fight, and that's what I'm expecting, is an interesting fight in any event. It'll be interesting to see how exactly it plays out anyway. And on the undercard of that is Curtis Stevens versus Derek Finley. Derek Finley is a guy that's basically a journeyman. Again, no disrespect to the guy, but he's lost to pretty much all of his upper tier opposition, and Curtis Stevens should be able to pull this one out. Curtis Stevens, that is, has kind of had an up and down type of career, highly touted at first, and then wound up losing, and had a couple of bad showings, notably against Andre Durrell, which was absolutely just a woefully dreadful fight. It was terrible. And that hurt his stock, needless to say, and I'm not super interested in watching him fight in general, I guess, but at the same time, if it's free boxing on NBC Sports, I'll take it, and I would expect Stevens to win that pretty easily. And of course, the real meat of the weekend is Saul Canelo Alvarez versus Austin Trout on Saturday night on Showtime. That's the fight that everybody's going to be talking about afterwards. It's the fight that we're talking about going in for the most part, and it's a good fight. It's a competitive fight as I see it. It's two guys who are undefeated, although the undefeated part I don't think matters quite as much as the fact that they've both proven to be, I think on Trout's part, highly skilled. He uses his feet well. He punches very sharp. Throws textbook type of shots and is fairly tight on his defense and careful, but at the same time, Alvarez, even though he's not very skilled per se, not in the classical sense, what he does take skill, and that is back guys up and strong arm them to the ropes and basically wail away and keep them there with a variety of punches, and that does take skill. It's not the classical type of use your feet, hopping around type of skill, but it is skill nonetheless. And I think that it's an interesting fight because we haven't seen anyone really have long-term, a long-term success during a fight in pushing Austin Trout back and forcing him or forcing him to fight. Miguel Cotto was able to do it for a few rounds. Even though it wasn't super effective, he was able to do it. And but Delvin Rodriguez was a guy that a lot of people thought was strong going into that fight, and he was just not even really in that fight. So I think that it's a very interesting matchup, and no matter what, we're going to learn something about both guys that we didn't know before, one way or another, or maybe that some of us suspected, but it hasn't played out. And I personally think that Alvarez is probably going to take a close decision, maybe even a controversial decision. It's just that I kind of have a difficult time seeing him really muscle around Austin Trout, who I think has fought in a couple higher weight classes and looks like a pretty strong guy himself. But I don't know that Austin Trout is himself going to have a ton of success keeping Alvarez totally off of him. So I see a fairly close and hotly contested fight that Alvarez will probably take a decision on, but we'll see how it plays out, and I hope it winds up being as exciting as we hope it is. And on the undercard of that, really the only notable fight that I'd like to talk about is Omar Figueroa versus Abner Cotto, and that is also, I guess, fairly notable because, and I hate to, say the U word again, both of these guys are undefeated, and I don't want to place too much emphasis on that, but it is kind of an interesting fight, I guess, style-wise. I don't know that it's totally worthy of being the co-main to a fight like Alvarez-Trout, but at the same time, Figueroa is a guy who's coming up. I've seen him, I want to say 2 or 3 times. I remember seeing the Michael Perez fight on Showbox, and I'm not overly impressed with him. However, I'm even less impressed with Abner Cotto, and that's kind of what my pick comes down to. I would guess that Figueroa takes it. I'm not entirely sure how, but my guess would be that he's probably going to at least outwork Cotto a bit. Cotto, and the reason for that is because Abner Cotto, even though I haven't seen much of him, I did look him up, and I didn't watch a ton, but when I did see his ledger, a lot of the guys that he was taking the distance with, or was taking split decisions off of, these are guys who have served as kind of walkover opponents for other prospects since then or right before he took them on, and so I think that that's significant. I can't speak too much on him since I haven't seen a ton, but my guess would be that Figueroa takes that fight. And that basically wraps up the preview for this weekend, although I would like to thank my coworker Karina for letting me skip home a little bit early tonight so I could do this and research it and stuff like that. And thank you once again for everybody who's tuning in and helping me out. And please visit queensburyrules.com. Have a great night, and I hope the fights this weekend are great. Take it easy.